World News Today, brought to you by the Admiral Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's Smart Set, and post-war makers of Admiral Major Home Appliances. By shortwave broadcast direct from important overseas stations, as well as leading news centers of our own country, CBS correspondents are waiting to bring you a complete report from the world's political and battlefronts. But first, here's Doug Edwards.
These are the news highlights of the moment. American bombers based in the Mediterranean area have made their fourth attack on German industries in Steyr in Austria. Moscow dispatches say the hour of liberation is near for the Black Sea naval base of Odessa, with two powerful Russian armies closing in on the city along a 175-mile front. In the Far East, the Japanese have cut the important road leading from the Allied supply base at Impol to Kohima in India's Manipur province. And now, news direct from Italy and an interview with one of our fighting men from Tennessee. Admiral takes you to CBS Naples. Eric Severide reporting.
The last news bulletin from here announces a heavy raid by Mediterranean Allied Air Forces on the aircraft and ball bearing factory at Steyr, 90 miles west of Vienna. That happened today. There was fierce opposition, both from flak and fighters, but we're not told how many planes we lost. The flying fortresses also bombed rail yards in Yugoslavia. Here on the Italian front, the heavy artillery duel was continued and patrols were active. Patrols were active is an innocent little phrase you see every night in a communique. I want you to hear now what a patrol is actually like. The time was Thursday, the place a brown knoll called the Pimple in no man's land. The speaker is Lieutenant John Lamb of Knoxville, who at the moment has a big adhesive patch on his lower lip.
I took out 4 men and we sneaked out at 3 in the morning. We crept along, boiled apart. About 5, a German yelled, "Halt." We were silent, and then they threw a grenade. It exploded only about 10 feet from one of my men, but he was only scratched. I felt a sting in my lower lip, and it began to bleed. The bullet had just grazed me. We backed down and called for mortar fire over our portable radio. They poured it on. Then we went ahead again. About 9, we came to the house.
Well, Lieutenant, how did you know that the Jerrys were inside?
Well, I could hear them snoring upstairs. I posted my men and slipped around the corner. The German stood there just buttoning his trousers. I pointed my carbine and motioned to him to surrender. He stuttered, shouted, then jumped right on me, grabbing the gun. I jerked it away. I wanted a prisoner, but he ran off, and I had to shoot him.
And how about the Germans inside?
They pitched out a grenade, but I ducked in the doorway. Then I jumped in again, threw in 5 grenades. Smoke poured out, and I could hear them moaning. I stepped in again with Sergeant Farr behind me. A sniper's bullet from the hill hit him in the spine. I dragged him inside. He spoke to me for a moment, then suddenly died. There was more firing. One Jerry left alive tried to man a machine gun at a window, but my men outside killed him. A couple of Germans tried to run away, but we got them too. Just how many Germans died, I don't know, but 6 for certain.
Well, Lieutenant, there was still enemy on the hill, and it was broad daylight, so how did you get away?
There was a kind of a ditch, a culvert. We dashed down that one at a time, bent over low. We had to leave the sergeant's body behind, but the rest of us came back. How did you feel?
All right. I return you now to CBS in New York.
More news in a moment. But first, Warren Sweeney with a message from Admiral Corporation.
Do you want to save money on foods and still give your family the finest fare they've ever had? Then you'll want an Admiral home freezer locker after the war. With an Admiral home freezer locker, you'll be able to quick freeze vegetables and fruits from your own garden, thus enjoying fresher, more healthful foods the year round. And you can really save a lot of money by buying and storing meats in larger quantities. You'll spend much less time in the kitchen, too, for frozen foods need no preparation. They cook much faster, they contain no waste. Frozen foods retain more vitamins, too, and the danger of taint and spoilage is completely eliminated. Yes, the modern home freezer locker by Admiral will introduce a new, better, thrifty way of life. And it will be backed by all the prestige and experience of Admiral Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's Smart Set, and post-war makers of Admiral refrigerators and Admiral electric ranges. Now, here once again is Doug Edwards.
Radio France at Algiers, without confirmation from Allied headquarters, reports that a force of British and American commandos have raided the German-held island of Salta in the Adriatic off the port of Split. Our men are said to have captured 111 Germans and destroyed many installations, among them a wireless station. The French broadcast gives no details on the size of the attacking force. And now for the news here at home, Admiral takes you to CBS Washington, Don Pryor reporting.
Republicans and some Democrats have rallied around the proposal by Palmer Hoyt of Portland, Oregon, for a senatorial investigation of the government's handling of war news. Hoyt used to be chief of the OWII's domestic branch. In a speech at Omaha, he charged that vital news is being withheld from the public and even from Elmer Davis, director of the Office of War Information. Today, Senators Taft and Reed, both Republicans, and Senator O'Mahony, a Democrat, agreed that something might be done about it when Congress reconvenes. Meanwhile, most senators and congressmen are at home and won't be back until April 12th, at the end of the Easter recess. Just now, most of them are more interested in the coming general election than anything else, because all members of the House and 34 of the 96 senators are up for re-election. When they do come back, they'll have a heavy schedule of several important bills: Lend-Lease and OPA extension, several appropriation measures, and possibly a new fight in the Senate over poll taxes. Then, most of them will want to adjourn for the summer, probably sometime before the national conventions. Senate Majority Leader Barkley endorsed the proposal yesterday on the condition that all of the important bills be cleared up first. I return you now to Admiral Radio in New York.
British mosquito bombers again raided Germany last night. And now for that news and an interview with a fighting man from San Angelo, Texas, Admiral takes you to CBS London, Larry LeSueur reporting.
Again today, the American flyers of our liberators and fortresses are reported blasting Germany in daylight. Day after day, these young men offer their lives in order to spare those of their fellow men who must one day crash through Hitler's Atlantic Wall. The physical strain on our airmen battling for hours over Germany is self-evident. The story of their mental strain has yet to be told. Tonight, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Audrey of Paris, Kentucky, who has just completed 25 bombing missions from Ploesti to Berlin, will tell you how American pilots steel their minds for the strain of combat.
You wonder about the mental processes of a combat airman. I did, too, before I began to bomb Germany. Now I know that I began to condition myself mentally long before I made my first mission. By mental conditioning, I mean reasoning with yourself to reach a state of mind where you cannot become a victim of panic, no matter how frightened you get. And I've been truly scared many times. You must not let it paralyze your powers of reasoning. If you do, it may mean your death and that of your crew members. Long before the takeoff, you must plan your actions should shells explode in the cockpit or if your plane is on fire. A pilot learns early that his greatest danger is that of panic. On every mission, he knows he may be faced by an impossible situation. But as he gets more experienced and has brought home a battle-damaged ship with wounded men, he realizes that these impossible situations are comparatively few. He knows that they are really only emergencies of different degrees of intensity. A cool, experienced crew and pilot will survive them. A crew poorly trained or panicky will not. To prepare himself for battle over Germany, a pilot must foresee every emergency he can possibly imagine and plan to face it. He trains his crew in emergency procedures. They discuss the case histories of men who came back against odds, and they conjecture why other men did not return. To be fully competent, every airman must frame his mind to accept a chance of death. Most Americans love their home more intensely the longer they are away. And most of the boys I've worked with feel that the preservation of their home is worth much more than the chance they must take. Religion is a great help for many airmen. From my experience as a liberator pilot, I can tell you that chaplains of all faiths play a vital role on the American airfields in Britain. They help the men to understand what they believe in is worth fighting and dying for. As a result, no American bomber formation has ever been turned back from its target. no matter what the Germans have done to stop it.
That was Lieutenant Colonel Philip Audrey, Berlin veteran. And this is Larry Lasser returning you now to New York.
For a summary of the situation on the Russian front, here is Columbia's military analyst, Major George Fielding Elliott.
The Russians appear to be pursuing, as their immediate major objective in the south, the encirclement of the German forces still remaining in the southwestern Ukraine. Don't overestimate the number of these troops. They've been variously stated as from 100,000 to 300,000, but undoubtedly a good many of them have been withdrawn westward across the Dniester River. The main Russian advances reported in the last 2 days have been on the semicircular front closing in around Odessa and in the direction of Tiraspol, which is the principal railway crossing of the Dniester, still in German hands. The Russians have not yet claimed any crossing of the River Prut along the frontier of Romania proper. On the western portion of the front, the Russian progress has tended to slow down. They've cut the German railway communications at Kolomer and at Delatin and at Chernouty. And now the Russians appear to be engaged in consolidating their gains and in wiping out the German pockets of resistance at Tarnopol and in the vicinity of Kamenets-Podolsk. The determined resistance of the entirely surrounded German forces in these two areas is denying important communications lines to the Russians, and the fall of these two pockets of German resistance, when it comes, should release Russian energies for further progress. It must, however, be remembered that the Russians in this area are suffering supply difficulties of their own, quite aside from the German grip on the 2 points mentioned, and advances are likely to be followed by successive periods of delay in consolidation. It is notable that the German communique mentions a renewal of heavy Russian attacks on the northern front, in the vicinity of Pskov, south of Lake Peipus. It would seem quite likely that the Russians will continue to exert pressure in the north, where a German withdrawal must eventually take place if the Germans are to reconstitute an unbroken front against the Russian armies. This pressure seems likely to extend to the central front as well, where the Germans cannot delay much longer in retiring behind the barrier of the Privet marshes.
That was Major George Fielding Elliott. Germany this week continued to stress its readiness for the invasion. For a summary of other stories from inside German-held Europe, Admiral takes you to CBS Madrid. Glenn Stadler reporting. We regret that we are not able to make contact with our correspondent in Spain. Allied observers today are waiting for the next step in Finnish-Russian negotiations on Moscow's armistice proposals. Reliable quarters in Stockholm say the Russians are understood to have expressed a willingness to allow Finland to retain the Hango Peninsula and the city of Viipuri in a modification of the original Soviet demands. Dr. Paasikivi, a former Finnish cabinet member, is said to have returned to Helsinki after discussing the new details in Moscow. The Russians now are said to be demanding a high reparation claim from the Finns, so high that some sources in Stockholm fear that the Helsinki government may regard it as excessive. The Finnish cabinet meets on Monday, probably to discuss the latest Russian terms. From Burma, Allied headquarters reports that small parties of Japanese have succeeded in cutting the important Impel-Koima road at several places, some 60 miles north of Impel. A headquarters statement says the Japs are evidently trying to make a major cut in that road and make it stick, thus blocking the entire British network of land communications between central Burma and India. There are other reports, unofficial, that the Japs have cut the Ukhrul road. Ukhrul itself is 32 miles to the northeast of Impel. Allied planes continue to hammer the Japs over a wide front, and heavy bombers have started large fires at a railway station in Rangoon. We're also told that the Allied troops who landed by glider deep in Burma several weeks ago under command of the late General Wingate had to stop their air operations for a few days to battle Jap troops which had infiltrated to the perimeter of the Allied airstrip. But the enemy has now been cleared out of the sector, and air operations are continuing. There's still no word from the heavy Navy task force which hit Palua earlier this week But now for a summary of latest developments in the Central Pacific and an interview with a bombardier from Providence, Rhode Island. Admiral takes you to CBS Pearl Harbor. Webley Edwards reporting.
In a few brief months, the Central Pacific Air War has moved forward between 1,500 and 2,000 miles. The 7th AAF was bombing the Gilberts last fall. They're now giving Truk a regular going over. Of greatest importance on the road to Truk is the eastern Caroline island of Ponape. It was here the Americans gave a Jap community its first sustained blitzing in history. True, Tokyo was hit in a quick-running strike, but at Ponape, the 7th AAF blasted a small city to destruction. Here with me in Hawaii is Lieutenant Edward V. McDermott of Providence, Rhode Island, bombardier of the B-24 Liberator named Tandaleo, because, as the boys say, of its white cargo. He was in the first squadron to make this historic blitzing of Ponape. And, Lieutenant, will you tell us about it?
Ponape was the principal bastion between our bases and the prime air target of Truk. Our job was to reduce it as an effective base for the Japs. As the only major city between Honolulu and Truk, it was for us a target of great importance. I caught my first glimpse of it while we were circling through the clouds. It lay stretched out before us, the biggest civilization we had seen in months.
What was the procedure?
Our liberators went in over a period of days in successive waves with 100 to 500 pounders and firebombs. The reason for destroying the city was, of course, its military value as a supply and headquarters center for the Jap airfields and installations. Our incendiary attack was the first concentrated use of firebombs in the Central Pacific and the first all-out blitz against any Japanese city.
Did you meet much opposition?
Well, Ponape is a difficult target because it is often obscured by crowds, often necessary to circle above the city for 20 minutes to find a hole to get our bombs through. But the Jap pack can't see it through so well either.
How did it feel to drop your bombs over a Japanese city?
Well, it was rather unusual to see Ponape City because we had been bombing coral atolls. After that, it was just like any other bombing, and we were pretty busy. It took a week of all-out bombing to do the job. The city was blasted or burned out to the edges, and I think we can probably bomb any part of it faster than the Japs can rebuild it. Ponape will still be a tough target, and we will probably keep right on hitting it. But you might say that Ponape is no longer a formidable link in Japan's island defense chain.
Lieutenant McDermott, after 17 long-range missions in the Pacific, you're having the customary rest period and soon will be going back. What's next in your thoughts?
Naturally, to get the war over with as soon as possible and then go home. The blitzing of Ponape City was really only a rehearsal for what we have to do in the future and for what we expect to give to Japan proper. No matter what we do to the islands in between, we never take our eye off the ball. Japan and Tokyo.
And good luck to you, boy. Lieutenant Edward McDermott, bombardier on a B-24 Liberator, was in the first squadron ever to give a sustained blitzing to a Japanese city, the city of Ponape on the road to Truk in the Carolines. This is Webley Edwards at Pearl Harbor, returning you to Admiral Radio in New York.
And now for an interview with a lieutenant commander in the Navy Medical Corps. Admiral again takes you to CBS Washington. Don Pryor reporting.
Last night in Constitution Hall, a crowd of Washingtonians saw the world premiere of a new movie called The Story of Dr. Wassell. And here is the real-life hero, Dr. Corydon M. Wassell. You probably remember the story because President Roosevelt told it to the nation in a speech on this network 2 years ago. Dr. Wassell was a missionary in China when the war began. He was nearly 60 years old, but he volunteered for service in the Navy and was commissioned a lieutenant commander. He went to Java and was assigned the job of caring for the wounded officers and men of the cruisers Houston and Marblehead. When did you go to Java, Dr. Wassell, and how did you get there?
I arrived in Surabaya, Java, on the SS Polk on January the 27th, 1942. And I left on the last ship after the Japs had landed on March the 3rd, 1942.
Well, Dr. Wassell had his wounded men with him and got them safely to Australia. How many were there, Dr. Wassell?
There were 47. I lost 5 of them. 2 died on the train going from Jakarta to Cilacap and on the south coast of Java. 3 died at Jakja, or Jakarta. And out of the 42 who were left, I got 41 out. Only one, a new Navy wounded man, was taken prisoner.
Well, do you know that he was taken prisoner? Have you heard from him since?
Yes, his name was on one of the prisoner lists that came through just a short time ago.
Well, you had to take all these men all the way from the north coast of Java to the south, didn't you? How did you do it in the face of the Japanese invasion?
Well, it wouldn't have been possible if it hadn't been for the superb bravery and determination of the Dutch, especially one young man, a Dutch seaman, I can't give you his name, who was assigned to me as a liaison officer. He arranged for the train that took us from Cilacap, Java to Jakarta, and saw that we had everything we needed. I've recommended that his own government give him an award for the work he did.
Well, Dr. Wassel finally got his men out of Java on the MS Jensen, the last ship that made it to Australia.
It was hardly even a ship. It was a little 1,800-ton coastal vessel that was supposed to carry not more than 180 people. But when we left Cilacap, there were 700 or 800 people aboard, men, women, and children. The Japs came over and machine gunned us off of the south coast of Java, and Captain Prance put in to shore. Many of the passengers decided to leave the ship right there.
Well, why did you stay there, Dr. Wassel?
Because the boys wanted to. I went below and asked each one of them in turn whether he wanted to go ashore and be safe but a prisoner, or to stay on the ship with almost certain chances of being killed.
And they decided to go with you, and Dr. Wassel got them on down to Australia, and all of them got home safely. I return you now to Admiral Radio in New York.
Some late reports. The German radio broadcast a few minutes ago that the Russians have broken into the Ukrainian strongholds of Tarnopol and Kovel. And the Swiss radio just announced that Swiss airspace again was violated this afternoon by what the Swiss radio called isolated planes. The Russian news agency TASS reported this morning that Chinese troops from Xinjiang, China's northwestern province, violated the border of the Mongolian People's Republic late in 1943. TASS says Chinese planes bombed towns and villages and strafed Cossacks fleeing from Xinjiang. The background is this. Well-informed sources are quoted as saying that at the end of last year, Xinjiang authorities began a forced evacuation of a great number of Cossacks from the Altai Mountain District to the southern district of Xinjiang. And now Warren Sweeney with a word from Admiral Corporation.
We know that many of you plan to completely renovate and remodel your homes when the war is won. Your plans probably include new furniture, and there will be an Admiral radio and a superbly styled cabinet to match the decorative effect of your home. Admiral will keep up its tradition of fine cabinets to add grace and charm to any surroundings. There will be period designs for those who want them, or if your choice runs to the more modern, there will be an Admiral to suit your taste. And you may be certain you will find enduring construction as well as matchless beauty. With a cabinet that is an exquisite piece of furniture, plus the dependability and fine performance of the Admiral radio and Admiral automatic record changer, you'll be happy to choose an Admiral, America's smart set, built by the world's largest manufacturer of radio phonographs with automatic record changers. The appearance of personnel of the armed services on this program does not necessarily constitute an endorsement of our product by the armed services. Despite the excellent progress of America's huge synthetic rubber program, we still face a critical shortage of tires for civilian use. Military demands make it impossible to meet normal civilian requirements. The only answer to this tire shortage is strict conservation. Every car owner is urged to conserve his present tires to the utmost and have them recapped as soon as they need it. America's rubber-borne transport must be kept rolling. World News Today is brought to you each Sunday at this hour by Admiral Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's Smart Set, and post-war makers of Admiral Refrigerator, Admiral Home Freezer Locker, Admiral Electric Range. Be sure to listen again next Sunday when Admiral brings you World News Today by shortwave, direct from leading news centers of the world. Warren Sweeney speaking. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
The WBBM Air Theater, Wrigley Building, Chicago 11.
World News Today, brought to you by the Admiral Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's Smart Set, and post-war makers of Admiral Major Home Appliances. By shortwave broadcast direct from important overseas stations, as well as leading news centers of our own country, CBS correspondents are waiting to bring you a complete report from the world's political and battlefronts. But first, here's Douglas Edwards.
The Allied advance in Italy continues to be a slow and tough operation, with the Germans putting up a stiff fight. More news direct from the Italian theater in a moment. The British radio has just announced that after a day-long lull in the Allied air offensive from Britain, observers on the Channel coast report that 2 waves of Allied planes have flown out over the direction of northern France. Dispatches from China say that fierce fighting continues in the Loyang area, with the Japanese hammering the city itself from 3 directions. Now Admiral takes you to Naples. Farnsworth Fowle reporting.
Strong forces of heavy bombers of the 15th AAF today attack rail yards and aerodromes in northern Italy in coordination with the ground offensive. At Ferrara, Mantua, Vicenza, Padua, Piove di Sacco, Treviso, and Mestre. In today's communique appears a list of towns and summits that have fallen since the capture of Mount Maio. There will be more to add tomorrow. This morning, as 2 of us drove down a cart track on the lower Garigliano sector, we rounded a corner and saw 2 men walking ahead of us. The first was a German, disarmed. Right behind him, an American doughboy with bayonet fixed. We offered him a lift. The prisoner got in the back seat of the Jeep. I sat beside him so that his captor could sit in front. That way, Private Anton Sokolovsky of Chicago had room to keep that bayonet right where he wanted it, within 6 inches of the German's uniform. He's a stubborn one, he said. He wouldn't move. Earlier in the morning, Private Sokolovsky's platoon had been in the final attack on Santa Maria Infanta. A sniper in a house there had picked off 1 man after another in the platoon. They surrounded the place, and Sokolovsky went through the door to root him out. The sniper dropped his rifle and surrendered. The German in the Jeep was that sniper. These 2 men had been fighting each other almost without rest for 60 hours. The battle had touched them in different ways. The loser, once he had given up, had lapsed into a stupor. Only the sight of that rigid bayonet shining along the blade and point kept some spark of consciousness alive. In the back seat, never quite impaling himself. For the American soldier, the job wasn't over, and so he had kept the fierce alertness of combat about him. He was at white heat as he told what the sniper had done. There is no bitterness among soldiers like the feeling against the sniper who from safe concealment shoots men down, and then at the end raises his hands in surrender, putting himself beyond the reach of their immediate personal vengeance under the rules of war. During that brief ride, the war had seen more real than earlier, watching the tanks, planes, and artillery hammering the German rear guard behind Santa Maria. I return you now to New York.
More news in just a moment, but first, here's Warren Sweeney with a message from Admiral Corporation.
Defrosting your refrigerator every week is a messy job, isn't it? How would you like to own a refrigerator that you never have to defrost? Of course you would. Then your after-the-war choice will be the Admiral refrigerator, the one that will never need defrosting. This is true because there'll be nothing to defrost. No bulky, frosty freezing unit. Therefore, no defrosting. You can readily see how much more food storage space this will provide when the cooling unit is gone. And in all this space, foods will stay fresh and crisp without covering. Admiral engineers have found that by building the cold-producing coils along an entirely new principle, it is possible to maintain a high degree of humidity, creating a condition of gently moving, moist, cold air that has the freshening effect of cool dew on foods. So, if you want the new, improved ideas in refrigeration, no defrosting, and no covered dishes, you'll want your peacetime refrigerator to be an Admiral, built by the makers of Admiral Radio, America's smart set. Now, here once again is Douglas Edwards.
The United States recently opened its own radio station in Britain to tell the people of Europe the true news of the world and what to expect in the near future. For a description of this station, Admiral takes you to London. Charles Collingwood reporting.
The American Broadcasting Station in Europe has its premises, appropriately enough, in a section of London that is inhabited by the peoples of many European countries. One corner of a building in this polyglot and somewhat exotic atmosphere has been taken over by ABC, as everyone calls the American Broadcasting Station in Europe. There's not much room, and the 90-odd people who operate ABC are practically in each other's laps. Most of those people, even those who broadcast in European languages, are Americans and have been sent over here from America. Because ABC exists here in London, because it has been thought important to present a peculiarly American point of view to the people of Europe. Happily, the framework of the United Nations is not so restrictive that it precludes different emphasis by different nations on different things. ABC exists to give the American emphasis. ABC is on the air right now. Its call sign is recognized everywhere as unmistakably American. It goes like this. To Europe, that means America is on the air. And that phrase from Yankee Doodle is as American as Uncle Sam's striped pants and star-spangled waistcoat. At this moment, ABC should be putting out a program in French, and we'll try to pick it up. This is what the people of France are hearing from America.
Français, les transports à l'intérieur de la France deviennent de plus en plus difficiles. Les communications ne peuvent que devenir plus malaisées encore. Les événements peuvent se précipiter. Dès à présent, les habitants des villes doivent faire l'impossible pour évacuer les enfants, les femmes, les vieillards de la campagne. Ils doivent aussi faire l'impossible pour constituer des stocks alimentaires. Les villes peuvent être coupées de tout ravitaillement. Les Allemands ont pillé toutes les réserves accumulées à Paris et dans les autres grandes cités. Habitants des campagnes, fonctionnaires, docteurs, cheminots, aidez les gens des villes. Faites-leur parvenir des vivres. Accueillez leurs familles dans vos maisons. L'intérêt général exige que chacun se substitue aux autorités défaillantes pour préserver la santé et la vie des Français, l'avenir de la France.
I won't try to translate that for you word by word, but this is in general what was just being said to the French people. Transport to the interior of France is getting more and more difficult. It can only get still worse, so from now on, they said people who live in cities must do the impossible and evacuate women and children and old people to the country. And ABC urged the French to hoard food. The cities of France may be cut off from all food, they said, and already the Germans have pillaged the reserves of food in Paris and the other big cities of France. This announcement ended by urging the country people of France to help the city people by getting food to them and by taking their families into their houses in the country. Well, that's what ABC has just been saying to France. But these advices to the people of occupied Europe are only part of the service. ABC is on the air 8.5 hours a day in half a dozen European languages. The basis of its report is news, truthful news from the American point of view. The WWII in America has a special wire to the American Broadcasting Station in Europe and maintains a constant service of news. Besides that, special recorded features are sent from the United States, and the whole operation is carefully attuned to American policy. It was a tremendous job getting ABC set up. Most of the equipment had to be shipped over here from the United States. Some of it was sunk on the way. Finally, after many difficulties, the studios were run up in a record-breaking 2 months. And 2 weeks ago, today, ABC, the American Broadcasting Station in Europe, made its first broadcast to Europe. Both Robert Sherwood, who is OWI's overseas director, and Brewster Morgan, who is in charge of OWI broadcasting over here and hence of ABC itself, both of them say that they could never have done it all without the help of the BBC, which gave everything it possibly could to help put ABSI on the air. And for that matter, this program and all of our Columbia Broadcasting System programs from London could never have been made without the help of the British Broadcasting Corporation. The BBC and ABSI are doing complementary jobs. They're talking to the same people in different ways, and they are both doing their jobs well. It has been a hard job to get an American broadcasting station in Europe into operation, but it has been done because a lot of people have been willing to work hard, to work intently and earnestly for something they believed in. These people believed that the voice of America must be heard. This is Charles Collingwood in London, returning you to Admiral Radio in New York.
One of the greatest jobs being done in this war is moving supplies over the hump into China by the Air Transport Command, which has conquered one of the world's most dangerous flying areas. For an interview with a veteran pilot just returned to the States, Admiral takes you to CBS Louisville, Bill Slocum, Jr., reporting.
Here in Louisville today are 4 rugged young men who have just finished a long and dangerous tour of duty, jockeying bulky transports from India across the jagged peaks of the hump and into China. For the time, their job is done, and they are now embarked upon what they consider an even more dangerous mission. They are playing a few dates on the rubber chicken, we appreciate what you are doing for us circuit. In other words, they are building morale, civilian morale at that, by making speeches in war plants, at luncheons, and shaking a million hands. I've asked one of the boys, and that's the word because he's only 24, to submit to another verbal mauling with me this afternoon. He is Captain Bill Bevan, late of Muscoda, Kansas, and now of the Air Transport Command, China-India Wing. Captain Bevan, how do you like your current assignment?
Well, they tell us this helps production of planes, and after a few months of flying supplies into China by air, I'll do anything that'll get us more planes.
Tell us something about the hump, Captain.
Well, at first it looks like an easy flight. It's only about 3 hours, you know. Then it suddenly dawns on you that there's not one single spot where you could land. Then you discover 2 more things, mountains and Japs.
Well, why don't you get plenty of altitude and fly over the mountains?
Because you just can't get that much altitude. Every plane is loaded to capacity, usually with high-octane gas or ammunition, or some other highly explosive material. You just got to set your course, pray for good weather, although you know better, and hope your instruments are true.
How about that weather, Captain?
It's the only place in the world where the flying weather is always wrong. It's usually too cloudy and foggy to see much, and that means instrument flying, or you're liable to hit a cloud with a rock in it.
The rock in this case meaning the top of a mountain. Isn't the weather ever good, Captain?
Sure. Then you have to fly up and down mountains at treetop height, so the Japs won't shoot you out of the air.
How many missions over the hump have you?
63 round trips.
What cargo do you fly usually?
Things designed to kill Japs or save Americans and Chinese. Airplane engines, trucks, ammunition, 100-octane gas, everything. Even mice.
Mice?
Sure. I know a major who got bumped off a trip because somebody had a higher priority. He didn't mind until he found he was outranked by a flock of white mice. The docs wanted them in China.
What were you flying over the hump?
2 engine jobs, mostly Curtiss Commandos. Pretty good once you learn how to handle them.
What was the toughest part of flying the hump?
Sitting in the plane at night when you couldn't see your wingtips, it was so black, and hearing some guy in another plane, some guy you knew pretty well, asking for a bearing on his radio because he was lost in the middle of those mountains. The static would be awful. You could hear the tower at Kunming trying to get through to him, and you could hear him trying to get through to the tower. Then you'd hear your friend say, "Out of gas. We're bailing out. So long."
Thanks, Captain Bill Bevan. I've watched you tote a chest full of campaign ribbons around Louisville with a fine grace, and you were very kind to come up here. So, the mic's all yours for that message you have for the American people.
Thanks. I've only been home a short time, and, well, do you know of any place I can get some laundry done?
Captain, don't you know there's a war on? I return you now to Admiral in New York.
Field Marshal Lord Ironside, the former chief of the British Imperial Defense Staff, has told British Home Guardsmen it's quite possible that when we make our great invasion, the Germans will make some sort of effort to land in Britain. Ironside said there's no doubt the presence of the Home Guard in Britain stopped the Germans from invading the country when they had a chance. Commenting on the possibility of counter-invasion, he said, "If the Germans try, I know that the Home Guard will know how to deal with them. Treat the Germans like the vermin they are. We have full confidence in you." And now for news from the Pacific and an interview with the commander of Fleet Air Wing 2. Admiral takes you after a few seconds' pause to CBS Pearl Harbor. Webley Edwards reporting.
One of the most useful air units of war out here in this theater is Fleet Air Wing 2, performing a dirty, tiresome job with great courage, tenacity, and heroism. For the first time comes one of these far-traveling Navy flyers to our microphone, and here's Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Lehman of Manchester, New Hampshire, whose wife and 3 youngsters, the youngest a boy whom he's never seen, are in Key West, Florida. Commander Lehman commands a patrol squadron of Fleet Air Wing 2. Commander, a good many people have the idea that all Navy planes operate from carriers.
No. The Fleet Air Wings, of which there are several in the Pacific, are shore-based planes. We use Liberators, Venturas, Coronados, dive bombers, Catalinas, and Mariners. Our squadron uses Mariners, the PBM. The carrier-based planes have their work, the Army planes have theirs, and we have a job that fits into the general scheme of this Pacific warfare.
And what's that, Commander Lehman?
Well, search, patrol, and convoy work. Also, and this is steadily growing, air-sea rescue work. The Mountain Mariner is particularly suited to landing on water and picking up flyers. Our squadron is often used to cover other bombing missions in case anyone is shot down. Then we pick them up.
You also do some bombing, though.
Yes. All Fleet Air Wing 2 planes are used as bombers at one time or another. For example, some of the wake bombings were done by the planes of this wing. We all carry bombs, and some of our boys have damaged or sunk Jap ships off Truk and Ponape. Most of our missions there have been over Ponape and the Carolines, hitting harbor and waterfront installations and picking off Jap ships. We also had a grandstand seat over Kwajalein and watched the whole invasion. It was beautiful to see the precision of the attack and the cooperation between the Army and the Navy and Marine Corps.
What's the average distance of your flights, Commander Lehman?
Well, we fly nonstop for around 14 to 15 hours on the average. You can figure that out for yourself. It's tedious, tiresome work, and most of the time it's not very spectacular. There is, of course, the danger of enemy planes. Sometimes we run into bad weather fronts, and then the weather changes from one minute to the next.
You do have your exciting moments.
Oh, yes, that's bound to happen in this kind of a war. For instance, Lieutenant Harold W. Schwert of Brooklyn was on night patrol when one engine cut out. He was about 400 miles from the base. He jettisoned his bombs and all the movable weight in the plane. But one bomb bay door wouldn't close, and that put quite a drag on the plane. He had to mush along barely fast enough to keep aloft for about 4.5 hours. But he made a nice single-engine landing with no damage to the plane. It was one of the best pieces of work I've ever seen. I would like to say to the folks back home that this is a vast ocean out here with unbelievable distances. And it's a big war. We would all like to be home, but there's a great deal yet to do.
You've heard Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Lehman, Squadron Commander of Fleet Air Wing 2 in the Central Pacific. This is Webley Edwards at Pearl Harbor, returning you to Admiral in New York.
For the news at home and an interview with a Marine combat correspondent recently returned from the Pacific, Admiral takes you to CBS Washington, Don Pryor reporting.
This is one of Washington's loveliest days, and the green parks are filled with people brightly dressed. For all that, the city is tense and bulging with speculation. But when it comes to real news about impending events, the lid has been clamped on tight. The storm is too close. This will be a busy week politically, and before it's over, President Roosevelt will have more than enough convention votes to win a fourth-term nomination on the first ballot if he wants it. Congress is going on a 6-day week in a homestretch sprint to wind up its business in time for recess for the summer political campaign. But there's a lot of work to do. Father Orlomansky, the priest who got in trouble with his bishop because he went to Moscow to visit Joseph Stalin, apparently has given in to the bishop's suspension order. He failed to show up in church this morning. And now I want you to meet a reporter, Diggory Venn, who used to be drama editor and general assignment man for the San Francisco Chronicle. He got married about 2 years ago, in March 1942, and he and his wife had a little apartment perched on the side of San Francisco's Telegraph Hill. Then things changed. He joined the Marines, and for the last 20 months or so, he has been a combat correspondent. New Caledonia, the New Hebrides, Guadalcanal, when it was making our biggest headlines, Australia and New Guinea. He just got back to Washington, and he's now a second lieutenant. I want him to tell you something about his job.
It's just like covering the police beat or a city hall assignment. Usually you attach yourself to headquarters so you know what's going on, and then you take a section of the front line and cover it, just like you would any other story.
Well, do you do any fighting?
Whenever they need you, and you always have to be ready. You're a Marine first and a correspondent second. In my case, I didn't do any actual fighting, but I would like to make a plug for my regiment. They fought 42 engagements on Guadalcanal, and we had the first 2 enlisted Marines to get the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Well, what kind of stories did you like best?
Personal stories about the men. But the best play I ever got was on a story about a beautiful Red Cross hostess in Australia, a girl named Ellen Brooke.
Women always get the play, don't they?
Those Red Cross girls deserve it. They're wonderful to see after a year or so in the jungles. One of the greatest thrills I ever had was last Christmas Day. I had just arrived at Milne Bay, New Guinea, after a long time up in the wilderness. I was walking along the beach trying to pretend that Christmas was just another day and that Milne Bay was a good place to be, when I came across a long, cool, thatched building with white women walking in and out. They were Red Cross hostesses, and it took me about 2 minutes to find out that one of them was an old and very good friend of mine, Jean Fay from San Francisco. She had seen my wife only 5 weeks before, and she gave me a graphic eyewitness report of how she looked, what she wore, how she fixed her hair, and what she said. Even how she still tossed her head when she scored a point in an argument.
I think I know what you mean.
And then, Jean said, she had a Christmas present for me. It was from a friend of ours in New York who had given it to her when she left the States with instructions to pass it along to the first mutual friend she found. And she found me on Christmas Day.
Well, I'm not going to say it's a small world, isn't it? But I guess it is. I return you to Admiral in New York.
The British Ministry of Information today issued a Southeast Asia Command statement on Jap casualties. It's not a very precise statement. Here's what it says. Allied troops in Burma are now inflicting on the Japanese a number of casualties which proportionately is rapidly nearing a higher point than any reached in any other theater where the Japanese are engaged. That sounds like it means that for the number of troops engaged, the enemy is losing more men in Burma than he is on any other active front. In a review of the past week's fighting, the statement says the Jap drive into India has failed completely and that the enemy is in an increasingly precarious position as the monsoon approaches. And now, once again, here is Warren Sweeney with a word from Admiral Corporation.
The strains of martial music have always played a great part in the morale of all our country's wars. This one is no exception. And on the battlefronts, in the training camps, and in the homes of America, Admiral radio phonographs with automatic record changers are playing their favorite recordings. The Admiral's fidelity of tone and flawless reproduction of any recording afford a new high in enjoyment to every listener. And the Admiral automatic record changer is so simple to load and unload. With its capacity of 12 records, a complete program can be presented without going near the instrument. And only Admiral has Slide Away. Admiral's Slide Away is so constructed that by merely opening the cabinet doors, the complete phonograph turntable and automatic record changer emerge to view, waist high, convenient to reach. Before the war, Admiral was the world's largest manufacturer of radio phonographs with automatic record changers. And the reason America preferred Admiral was because of the many distinct advantages over other types of automatic changers. So, if your post-war plan includes the purchase of a radio phonograph combination, you'll want an Admiral with Slide Away and the Admiral automatic record changer. As more and more of our men speed across the oceans, the work women can do behind the lines becomes increasingly vital. WACs have proved so efficient and so valuable to the Army that commanding officers are requesting their services in greater numbers than ever before. 10 times as many WACs could be used with the Army as are available at the present time. Women of America, take your place in the Army of the United States. The Army needs WACs. The WAC needs you. World News Today is brought to you each Sunday at this hour by Admiral Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's Smart Set, and post-war makers of Admiral refrigerators, Admiral home freezers, Admiral electric ranges. Be sure to listen again next Sunday when Admiral brings you World News Today by shortwave, direct from leading news centers of the world. Warren Sweeney speaking. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
The WBBM Air Theater, Wrigley Building, Chicago.